Okay, so to recap on what you just created, which again is this portion here, the square, the D, and the B, I want to go over a couple things that came up. So firstly, here's one confusing thing, and I didn't make this clear in the handout. Do you modify the existing sketch, or do you make a new one, or do you make it somewhere else? So the most important thing, again, is to always have the sketch attached to the origin. Whenever you create a new sketch, again, if I select the front plane here, and I type Alt-S, or again, I can go to the Sketch tab and press this. I enter Sketch World, and I know I'm there because of this icon up here. I can hit R to make this rectangle. Again, I think you all figured it out. Or we talked about this already. If you select both of these and set them to equal. So this is maybe what's kind of confusing, right? Is by making the rectangle, there are some built-in rules here, like this being vertical. Sometimes you have to manually apply rules. So in this case, you have to select both these lines and tell it to be equal, okay? Again, to add the dimension to it, you click on this, or you hit D. Now this is a little confusing. So firstly, the icon has the cursor has a little icon attached to it that tells you what tool you're using at the moment. So in this case, dimension. You can either select the whole line and apply a dimension to it, or you can select a point and another point and apply a dimension to it. But it's quickest to just select a line, which is I think what most of you did. So if I select this line, by just clicking it once, you now have this dimension. You can drop this anywhere. The dimension doesn't matter where it's located, like whether you drop it all the way to the left or to the right. This is just information for you. The length of the lines means nothing in SolidWorks. It automatically asks you what number to make it, so you can type in 2 and hit enter. Now, you can see my cursor still has the dimension icon on it. To get away from that, you just simply hit escape. To edit the dimension, I forgot to mention this as a lecture, but I think I mentioned some of you and others of you figured it out. If you double click on this number, you can edit it again to make a new number, and again, hit the check mark. Now, the challenge that I set for this one was how you can make the box centered on the origin. I don't know if any of you really got to that. No worries if you didn't. Any guesses how you might do it? How might I center this box on the origin? Yes, there are. So yeah, if I hit L to create a line, if I hover, you can see if I hover near the middle that this appears. That means midpoint. So I could create a line in the middle here. And again, you'll notice that these dotted yellow lines appear. Maybe hard to see on the projector, but if I create this vertical, do you see how there's that yellow box with a vertical line? That's asking you if you want to add that command to be vertical. Or I can snap it to the middle here. In which case, we now see 2 little boxes next to my cursor. Does everyone see that? That's adding 2 rules, vertical and coincident to the center. So that's what that's telling me. It isn't necessarily about relocating it, but that could be part of this. So I think if I delete, so if I click on the origin here, it's telling me it's coincident. If I click on this and hit delete, now this is free to move. If I make this for construction, I should be able to select the origin. So here's another way to add a rule manually. I can select the origin, I can hold down Shift or Control and select this line. And now it's giving me rules I can add, and I can you see here one of the options is midpoint, so I can click on that. So now I have my square as a midpoint on the origin. Does everyone see that? Okay. Now, are there any questions on that? Now, moving on, this is what I forgot to mention. A lot of you just continue to modify this shape. That's totally okay. What's important to know is that you can create new sketches. So you'll notice I made a new sketch, and it starts to appear in my Jenga tower here. It says Sketch 1. So if I exit Sketch World, I can do that in one of 3 ways. I can either click this icon, I can click this icon, or I can hit Alt-S. For what it's worth, if you click the red X, it will undo everything you did in the sketch. So try and avoid that. Sometimes you want to do it because you mess something up and you're like, you know what, I don't want to save my changes. Then you hit the red X. If you want to hit this, if you want to save your changes, you hit this icon here. And now you'll notice we're out of this sketch, it's gray. So you could hide this if you don't want to see it. It's simply right-clicking on this and clicking hide. Or you could create a new sketch on the front plane. So Alt-S. So this is where it gets a bit confusing. Sometimes you have gray sketches in the background. If I want to create now the D as in dog, I can click on here on the corner, because again, the origin is the most important thing. I'm still, based on my cursor, you can see it looks like a pencil with a rectangle. I'm still in the rectangle drawing tool. I hit escape to get out of that. So this is where some of you took different paths. The way that I would approach drawing the D is I would start with this rectangle, I would select this line, and I would set it to be for construction. So I think that was a confusing thing for some of you, is if I said draw a construction line, you might look to see where is the construction line tool. It's not an actual tool, it's just simply taking a line and changing its setting to be for construction. The next thing to draw, some of you started with a circle. To get the D, I would use an arc, so you would hit A. There's different ways to draw arcs, but 3-point arc is what I use the most. And this basically says you click 3 points to make an arc. So in this instance, I'm going to click here because that's where I want it to start. I'm going to click here because that's where I want it to end. And then the final click is, how big you want it to be. So you might want to like make it look close to where you want it to go and just click here. One thing I forgot to mention that Alex and I talked about, this blue highlight in here. When the blue highlight appears, it means that you have a closed shape, a closed profile that can be extruded or made into a feature. If it's not blue like it was before, that means it's open, and it's open because of this construction line. So once you have your arc placed, there's two ways to make this D. You can either take this point and make it coincident on this line. So again, it's adding a rule. The way that I do that is I select the points, I hold down Control or Shift, and I select the line. And now I have options I can say coincident. So that's one option. The second option is to select this and this line, again, holding down Control or Shift, and making it tangent. And now if I add in a number here, no matter what I put in, whether it's 4 or 2, it remains the same. It builds. Now as a challenge, is that a question? Grand scheme of things, it does not matter. If you want it to turn black and you want to fully define it, you could simply define this by setting it to be an inch. And now it's fully defined. So now when I drag on this, nothing happens. And again, for clarity, sorry, to make this more clear, I'm going to hide this. Yeah, Daisy. Correct. Yeah, you can extrude something that's completely blue. The black versus blue means, are there rules telling it what to be, or are there no rules? That's simply what the black and blue tells you. And blue is not a bad thing. There's different schools of thought in SolidWorks. You'll encounter some people that will claim everything should always be black. My personal opinion is that some blue is okay, and sometimes it's in fact preferred. It makes it a little more fluid and easier to work with. Sometimes if you have a very complex shape and everything is defined, it can be harder to make changes. So you kind of find a middle ground. Everyone has a slightly different preference what they want. Now, Alex had a challenge where he wanted this line to be exactly half the distance of this line. So one simple thing that I suggested is to make this literally a dimension and just do the math. But obviously, being a program, there's got to be better ways to do this. If you change this to 3, whoops, you don't want to now have to change this to 1.5. So there is a way, and again, this is again the first day when we built that Jenga tower structure, trying to figure out how to account for any problem that would happen, and it is part of like SolidWorks thinking. So let's say you did want this to always be half. I'm sure there's multiple ways to do it. The one way that I thought to do it is to take a construction line. So I could take a brand new line here. So if you select this, you can make it for construction. Now I can set it to be the same length as this one. So I can select both of these and I can say equal. Now if I take this point and I make it go to the midpoint of this, it should always be halfway. So now it's fully defined. So now if I set this to be 20, this dimension here should now be 10, which is listed right there. Does that make sense to everybody? That's slightly more advanced SolidWorks stuff, but it was a good question by Alex, and that's the way your brain should work in SolidWorks. Is there an automated way to do this? If I know I want this to always be half, how can I use maybe construction lines to do that? Okay, any questions on that? Finally, the B, just real quick. So some of you, again, edited the same file. That was totally okay. You could delete this. Now, some of you, I think, went to the midpoint here. And again, so I'm still in the arc tool, go to the midpoint. Now you could, again, set this to be tangents, like both of these, and say tangent. This and this to be tangent. And now you have a B. There's a brief conversation with Alex about deleting this out. Without this line, if you change this number, you'll see it doesn't change equally. And even if you were to set, you know, this may even change, right? Even if you were to set both of these to equal, you know, sometimes you get weird things that happen like this. So part of project one is designing a bottle that, or project one really is designing a bottle that you can change it to be 3 different sizes. So depending on the complexity of your design, you want to use some tricks like this, like using a construction line here. And having these be coincident to the center of it, so that when you change the size, the bottle's shape and design is maintained through the 3 different sizes. So that's why there's this exercise. Now, the final challenge here was how to dimension the width. Now, some of you got it simply by doing this. That's okay. Sort of what I intended was the overall width. So one way to do that, there's a couple ways. You can sketch points. So you could sketch a point into the middle here. And this now gives you an anchor, which to set your dimension to. So again, the point is this little icon here. Or the way that I sort of envision this going is to create a new line that's vertical. So again, you'll notice I'm creating a new line here. Watch my icon, my cursor. When I have it, when it goes vertical, it kind of snaps and the yellow vertical rule appears. And so now if I hit escape, if I click on this, that line was created with a vertical built into it. So sometimes it's automatic, sometimes you have to do it manually. Now to make it for construction, you can simply check this box. And selecting this line and this arc, if you click tangent, you now have a line that you can define the overall width to. So okay, different paths to the same end goal. Are there any questions on that? Okay, cool. This may be overkill, but I'm going to break these